sometimes mistakes lead to failures. Sometimes, what went wrong just happened, due to other circumstances. But I think it's been really interesting to have really successful people share their mistake stories and how they grew as a result, or how it opened doors. And I think that's reassuring. Look, I mean, people aren't successful because they've never made mistakes. If anything, they make more mistakes, but they learn from them.
To another amazing episode with my guest, Mark Graban. I am so pumped up for you guys to meet this man. Let me tell you just a little bit about him. He is a best-selling author, speaker. He has 2 MBAs from MIT, and he hosts 2 podcasts. I mean, he has helped organizations with manufacturing, healthcare, software. I mean, this man is like the brain that I need in my life. So I'm so excited to welcome you to the show, Mark, and for my audience to get to know you. And we know that those accolades are amazing, and I'm so proud of you, but we all want to know what went wrong.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the introduction, and I'm comfortable with talking about what went wrong, I think, for a couple of reasons. So, I have degrees in engineering. I think part of the engineering mindset is to try to be logical and rational about thinking of understanding the root cause of something that went wrong, or trying to prevent and think about what could go wrong. Some people aren't comfortable with that. And there are things that have gone wrong in my career. I've taken jobs that on some level turned out to be a mistake. I wasn't happy there, but it led to something else that was, a positive. So I think I've been taught that lesson. But I've been, next year I'll mark 30 years after graduating from undergrad. So I've worked in enough jobs in different settings now to try to reflect and think back. I think some of what went wrong with those job decisions was what was wrong with that environment, or how was it not a good fit for me. I've worked independently for about 13 years now, and I think I'm the best boss that I've had. I've had some good bosses, but at least I'm aligned with myself. But I think there are times where I think, well, to some extent, what was wrong with me that it was hard to fit in? I think in a lot of ways didn't feel like I was a good fit for those environments. And there's something to be said for, well, there's nothing wrong with you. If it's not a fit, do what you can, learn what you can, and move on. But, I started seeing some patterns, I think, and causes of frustration or sort of inner conflict or inner turmoil of why am I struggling to fit in or be happy in different environments, where I think on one level I should be happy in these environments, but it doesn't always work that way. And so, I want to talk about, some things that went wrong that are more about that inner struggle at times. And, I think some of it, I was in my first job out of MIT, and I was struggling with fit to the point where I reached out to an EAP counselor, employee assistant program counselor, to talk through some of these things. And I would encourage anybody, if your company offers that as a benefit, they say it's completely confidential. And I would hope that that's true. You could go through an EAP counselor, or if you go through your insurance and find a counselor that's somehow not connected to something like that. I think if in doubt, it's okay to reach out for help. So I reached out to a counselor just to kind of talk through that situation. And the one thing that was funny, that counselor said something to the effect of, the problem is not you. You wouldn't believe how many higher up executives in that company march through this office and complain about the same things you're complaining about. Like, the problem is not you. Like, okay, well, that's reassuring, I guess. Thank you.
Yeah, good.
But we did talk through some things. I don't want to just blame others. And I did leave that company months later, took a job at a startup. And so it was part of the positive that came out of being in Austin, Texas, because of that job. Now, I do remember the counselor, we talked through some things. She gave me a copy of a book called Driven to Distraction, which is one of the classic books about ADHD.
Okay.
And I may have started to read it and I didn't, which, so if that counselor suspected I had ADHD, starting and not finishing the book would be a comically stereotypical ADHD behavior.
Did you know the number one way to build wealth is through real estate? Have you always wanted to buy your first income property, but you didn't know where to start? Join my group, Legacy Wealth Builders, where we will teach you how to buy your first income property and then keep your wealth by teaching the success and wealth principles to your kids. Because it's not just about building your wealth, but it's about keeping it for generations to come. So click the link, join our group, because for the month of June, the group is free. So get all the training you need and join the group now. Right.
Because some shiny object book caught my attention now, and I started reading that. So then we fast forward to 2022. There was one organization that I was working with where, I was just getting myself in trouble by kind of, getting upset about things and popping off, for lack of a better way of putting it. It was damaging relationships in a work standpoint. And maybe this seemed like a very ADHD behavior. I was scrolling through Twitter one day, looking for that mental stimulation, things to read, and I stumbled across this article that was really eye-opening, and it was framed. The headline was something about how people with ADHD have an unusual sense of fairness, was the phrase. And I read the article. I did read the article.
The whole article.
I read the whole article, not just the tweet. I read the article. And it was eye-opening because I had realized that I struggled with paying attention when I wanted to or needed to. And there's a difference I learned between not wanting to pay attention and choosing not to pay attention versus wanting to or needing to, but struggling to stay focused anyway. Like, I've never lost a job over it, but I remember once, actually, I did get pulled aside by a consultant that I was working for, and how the client, like, I kind of got scolded for quote unquote multitasking or not looking interested in what was going on, or, and I could make excuses like, well, my wife and I are in the process of moving and stuff comes up during the day with the realtor, and, I'm sorry, like, but I learned, like, look, if you need to do stuff like that, sometimes you need to just leave the room and it looks better. But, in 2022, I read this article and it kind of realized that attention deficit, and it's not even attention deficit, it's misdirected attention. Like, if I'm interested in this thing in the moment, I can give all my attention to that, to the detriment of the thing I should be paying attention to.
Right,
so it's more of misdirected attention and an impulsiveness to shift your attention to the thing that's interesting in the moment. But then that article kind of taught me, like, I was getting upset about things that I thought were not only unfair to me, but unfair to some of my coworkers. Mm-hmm. And you might say this was triggering, but then the lack of impulse control to be able to react calmly. Okay. This article really pointed out the common theme in ADHD. It's more of a lack of impulse control. And I was like, this was eye-opening. And I thought, well, I shouldn't be in denial about this anymore. I should try to get help. I've kind of maybe wrecked a few workplace relationships, but I need to learn from it now, approaching age 50, rather than deal with it the rest of my career and life. So I went again to an EAP program person. And this was still kind of COVID times. So that was remote, and filled out surveys and talked to the counselor. And I ended up with a diagnosis and a prescription for ADHD medication and some continued counseling. And, for about 6 months, constantly trying to evaluate, like, is the medication working? Is this the right medication? Is this the right dose? Some days it's working, some days it's not. I don't know. And so then I decided I need to kind of up the ante on the help I'm getting. And I went to more of a, not a counselor, but, a clinical psychologist, more training, more,
Right.
just, and so I met with her and talked through things with her. And after a couple of sessions, she said, quite honestly, I don't think ADHD is the root of these things you're describing. I don't doubt that there's attention issues. I don't doubt that you get upset about things and have trouble being constructive or not holding, or having trouble holding back. But she's like, so there's a much deeper assessment. There's like 4 hours of different tests and assessments. And then coming out of that, she's like, yeah, I mean, all of these assessments and everything suggests that the root of these problems is something else. And she's, she didn't exactly say it this way, but to frame it for your show, what went wrong was that a screening tool was used to create a diagnosis when the psychologist said the screening tool should have then led to the deeper assessment.
Right.
And so now the path, over the last 6-7 months is kind of reframing, she said, to some extent, it doesn't matter. You've been struggling with mild depression with anxiety or anxiety with some depression. And I think, the anxiety manifests itself in some of that attention that's misdirected, being anxious about the things I should be doing or the things I want to be doing and having trouble putting that aside until the right time.
Right.
And
right. And I think
we've been pursuing that.
I think what you said with the reaction and not wanting to pay attention, I mean, sometimes that's just your personality. I mean, there's certain personality types that they have we get revved up about stuff, and then other personality is not. So I think it does a disservice to say you have a disorder because of how you're wired. And I agree with you that the assessment, it should go to a deeper thing, because labels for people, it's an identity piece. And I'm sure for you were thinking, man, I finally got help and here I have this identity. And then now somebody else is telling me, no, that's wrong.
Yeah. Well, and I totally agree. Disorder. And I was doing a lot to educate myself about ADHD, and some of the people I was listening to and reading say that same thing. It's a difference. And in a way, it was comforting to get a diagnosis because it's an explanation. Like if they say the ADHD brain is wired differently, and there can be some strengths, there can be some drawbacks. Maybe you need to learn to manage yourself differently, whether that's through medication or other channels. But where depression and anxiety is less about what you are and more about like what's happening in your brain. And there's not a brain scan they can do or a blood test to say, oh, well, it is ADHD. That's how you're wired. Versus, there's depression and anxiety that can be treated in the hope that it goes away, where ADHD is something more that's just being managed as a chronic, that's how you are condition.
Right. It's like an identity. It's like, oh, I'm ADHD, where like I am depressed or I have anxiety or I'm a little anxious. It kind of gives you the control back. And it's not like who I am. It's like, I'm feeling depressed right now. We all can feel depressed. We all can feel anxious. And so I think it does give you clarity on saying, okay, this explains some stuff. Like I have been suppressing and saying like, I'm not depressed. Okay, well, the truth is that I am. So I need to address it rather than just putting a label on you like I'm ADHD. And that's where I get a little irritated when they give kids that title, because kids are wired differently. And we put them in these settings that they are not meant to be in, like a school all day long. And then we put these labels on them. And it gives them an excuse like, oh, well, I'm ADHD. Or it gives them this self-limitation that I can never learn that because of this.
Yeah,
And
that's
so even,
unfortunate.
and I even with adults, it's like, oh, okay, now I have this, and not saying you do this, but it's like just human nature to be like, oh, well, because I have this, then that's why this happened, which could be, but it kind of it depowers you. You have no power then. You have no control then. So
Yeah.
you get this diagnosis of like, okay, really you're depressed with anxiety, which let's be real, like 90% of the country right now is feeling
It's
this post
common.
COVID, right? So then what happens?
Well, then, the question is, what to do. So, again, part of the equation can be medications with continued therapy, kind of that
Mhm.
combination of approaches. Um, one other thing I was going to share that I thought was interesting from these different assessments. Um, the psychologist said, like, there are some different tests they can do of attention, like auditory attention,
Mhm.
um, kind of tests that can quantify and compare your attention to other people. She said the tests show, well, for one, she said your brain runs really fast. I'm like, okay, well, I mean, look, I have 2 degrees from MIT. Like, okay, I'm not dumb. My brain runs fast. My brain gets ahead of myself sometimes, which can cause stress.
Right.
And then she said, quantitatively, objectively, your attention span is actually quite good. The problem is the anxiety that I was feeling about
Okay.
my perceived lack of attention. She said, that's off the charts high. So I think one of the key lessons was being poorly calibrated around what's quote unquote normal
Right.
and holding myself to a standard that was just unreasonably high. To think of, you're in a conference and there's presenters and like, whose mind doesn't wander? I
Oh
mean,
my
when I'm a
goodness.
speaker, do I expect that everybody in that room is hanging on every word? No. But why was I holding myself to this unreasonable standard and beating myself up about it? Now stuff starts spiraling
Yeah.
instead of having more acceptance of, okay, my mind wandered. That happens.
Right. Yep.
Move on. Don't dwell on it. Don't beat yourself up. And I think that's where um, the anxiety, I think, is a better explanation. And then there's the other thing, and this is where medicine's funny. Sometimes they don't know exactly what the diagnosis is. So they'll try medication. If the medication helps,
Yep.
well, therefore that's the diagnosis. And when I was sharing that, it seemed like some days the ADHD medication was helping and some days it wasn't. And she's like, that's because it's not ADHD.
Right. Right.
That's what we
That's
would
not
expect to happen. And
right.
so, that's hard then. And then I'll tell you though, I was very hesitant to try other medications because I've been steered wrong before.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
was really kind of hesitant, and I had to talk myself into the idea that it was okay to give it a try. Because here's the other threshold. Like, to me, like, trying medication for what we thought for ADHD was no worse than, like, if someone's born a type 1 diabetic and you need an insulin pump. That's not your fault.
Right.
That's how your body works, or that's how your brain works. Where I was feeling, I had to get past the idea of somehow thinking it was shameful to need treatment for depression or anxiety, that I couldn't
Right.
just try harder or deal with it better.
Right.
So that
But I
was
think
that was hard.
that is a stigma, especially with men, even to go to therapy. I
Hmm.
mean, I think it's better now than it used to be, but it's like, oh, what do you mean you need to talk about your feelings? What do you mean you need to
Right.
like,
Right.
what do you mean you can't sit through this? And again, I just go back to personality types and knowing yourself. Like I cannot sit in a conference, even Tony Robbins, if you've ever been to Tony Robbins, they're very invigorating and
Right.
up and down. And I still kind of think like, I gotta sit here. Like, and you're up and down all the time in his, but even that, I'm like, oh, doing the same thing. Like I have to have that variety. So
Well,
to
yeah.
do that is painful for me. Like,
Right.
I'm just like my attention for that. But you kind of nailed it. I think what I call the medical diagnosis, it's like, oh, you have this because this medicine cured you or whatever.
Yeah.
That happened to my sister. And I'm like, you labeled somebody because of a medication, which inevitably is going to trigger the brain because that's what it's supposed to do anyway. I'm just a big believer in labels, like
Hmm.
what you label yourself, what you identify as. And we are kind of fast and loose with labels, especially
Yeah.
medical,
Yeah.
and so it's like, what are the solutions? I'm not saying it doesn't happen. My sister was quote unquote bipolar. I don't know
Hmm.
if she was actually bipolar or if she just needed to stop drinking,
Hmm.
because there were times in her life that she wasn't. And she stopped taking the medication and she was fine. So I'm like,
Hmm.
was she or wasn't she?
Yeah.
And so
Well,
when we label ourselves, we really like put ourselves in that box.
and then there's the medical question that, at least for me, is unanswered yet of, do you take the medication long enough to kind of reset yourself and now I'm okay, and through the therapy,
Yeah.
I can better deal with it? Or is it something that I'm going to keep taking? I don't know. But can I share one other part of the story though, that just kind of came
Yes.
back to me,
Yes.
like like nothing on the medical side, but the labeling, like I was labeling myself in some ways as being a bad person for not paying attention. Like there was
Mm.
where like the shaming was happening.
Yeah.
And like one of the wake ups in early 2022, I was at a conference, and a woman who's a dear friend of mine was there at that conference speaking. And I was really excited to hear her speak. And I was sitting kind of up toward the front, and I was just happy to be there for her and to learn from her. And damn it, my mind started wandering and drifting after 10 minutes. And she's a very good speaker. And I have this very personal connection to her. And I got on the phone with her maybe like a week or two later. And I mean, I ended up, I ended up crying and like apologizing to her for not paying attention. And she's like, "Oh, well, I didn't notice you weren't paying attention." I'm like, "Well, I've tried to at least learn to, give the appearance
Yeah.
of paying attention." But she was really kind in sort of talking through how that was okay. And it didn't, but I felt worse about it. And it was kind of a wake up of like, I was like afraid of sending this inadvertent message to people that I'm not interested or that they don't matter,
Right.
when they do matter and they are interested. And trying to head off something that could maybe really hurt a friendship or a relationship or cause you to lose a job or something, like
Right.
that internal struggle and that labeling that had nothing to do with clinical terms, that was hard.
Yeah. Well, I think like you said, you held your standards higher and you weren't meeting them. It's like perfectionism. It's like, I have to be this. I must do this. Why am I not like this? And as a woman, women do, I'm sure men do it as well in a different way, but we're like, why am I not more like this person? Why can I not do this? Why can I not mom this way or run a business and this person's doing it? And that is where, like, what I call the bait of anxiety, the spiraling, it's like, the enemy, the opposition's baiting you because you are great at what you do, Mark. Like,
Yeah.
you are amazing. You're going to do great things. You've done great things. But how can I distract you? How can I make you think less than,
Yeah.
so that you feel bad or so that you don't do the things that you need to do? And
Right.
I'm going to put you in a whirlwind. And we live in a world where it's just like on fire of busyness,
Hmm.
like, I heard this, I don't know if you're a believer, but I heard this quote and it says, if the devil won't make you determined, he'll make you distracted.
Mm.
So like, if he's not, if he can't do this over here, he's just going to distract you over here.
Hmm.
And it sounds like that's what you were doing. Like, you were comparing yourself and holding yourself to the standard and then feeling bad about it. And just like that, the roller coaster of emotions.
Yeah.
And men don't talk about this because
Sure.
men are held at the standard of like, you just got to grin and bear it and you have to provide. And my husband sent me this little, I think it was a TikTok, and it was like a quote about a guy's mind, because women will joke, there's nothing going on in there. And it's just not true. They have all the pressure of providing and trying to placate the woman's emotions and do this over here and do the golf game with the guys and still have self time and, all the things.
Right.
And it's just like this cycle, and I'm not good enough, and I have to be empathetic, but I have to be strong. I can't cry, but I can't not cry. I have to provide, but I have to still be there for my family. I have to be sensitive, but I have to be strong. There's a
Right.
lot of contradiction, and
Right.
for women as well. And so it sounds like what you're going through, a lot of our male listeners can attest to. And so, maybe you weren't labeled ADHD, or maybe that label, but what label, audience, have you been identified as from somebody else that you think, oh, okay, well, this could be, but really it's not. It's like, let's address who you really are. Mark, you're your accomplishments are amazing. You're successful. You're empathetic. I can tell just from our pre-call. So all of those things are who you are. The other stuff, of course, is the opposition. Right? Like we feel the depression when we don't meet our standards because we've let ourselves down. And so then we're low. And so it's like, that doesn't mean that you are depression. It just means you're feeling depressed.
Yeah.
And you have the resources, whether that is medication. I'm not digging on medication. There is a time and place. There are definitely chemical imbalances in the brain. But I'm just saying we over medicate, we over prescribe instead of taking the time of like therapy or working through those emotions. Let's not cover up the emotions. Let's expose them.
Right.
And then if it's still not working and everything is just like, a mess, then you go to someone who is licensed in that and really figure it out. But I just feel like we're just so pill happy.
Yeah.
Like, let me just do this quick fix here.
Yeah. I mean, in both cases, with both diagnoses, the advice I got, and I think was good advice, not a what went wrong. I think one thing that went right was the advice that medication is not a cure-all. Medication can help, but therapy can still be helpful. So I've got stuff to unpack, and I'm feeling better. I mean, it's not like a case of the flu, and now that's behind me, cut and dry, better. But I think some of this goes hand in hand of, the medication helps me not be anxious about the anxiety or to let something go, to be a little bit more kind to myself, to be a little more understanding of others and not hold others to a standard that's unrealistically high. That's something, my therapist has talked about. And again, not in terms of like, this is what's wrong with you, but just to think through of reframing, being able to coach yourself. When that's appropriate. And so, I think there's a diagnosis versus a label. I wouldn't say I'm a depressed, but I'm somebody who has been dealing with, I guess would be a word, or getting treatment for. I think it's more of like, a disease as opposed to a chronic condition that you always perhaps have. And I know some people struggle with these things for much longer, and some people struggle with it far worse. But I mean, I think my one piece of advice, for what it's worth, is, if in doubt, if somebody listening thinks, well, I wonder if I should reach out for help, please do. If you're wondering, I mean, like some people, what's the expression? You mentioned drinking. There's an expression of like, if you're wondering if you're an alcoholic, you might very well be.
You might want to,
I mean, but that almost sounded like Jeff Foxworthy, and you might be a redneck, which is different. But I mean, I don't mean to make light of any of that. But I think look, if you think you need help, there's nothing wrong with reaching out for help. And again, that could be through a workplace EAP program. These things should be free and covered through a lot of EAP programs. You have that initial consultation, and if they refer you, you get a certain number of counseling sessions, perhaps that are completely free and not even requiring a copay through your insurance.
Nice. So. Yeah, I like what you said. When in doubt, it's like, just reach out, just figure that out. So Mark, thank you so much for being vulnerable and talking about this, because again, I know it's really hard for anybody, but especially men, to be like, you know what? It's okay to not be okay. We tell women that a lot, but men especially, it's okay to have to reach out. You're not just the stoic one man, like reach out. It takes a village, so definitely reach out. But I will put all Mark's links in the description, but is there anything that the last either parting words or a program that you have coming up or anything that you just want to share with our audience? Now is the time.
All right. Well, thanks, Tabitha. So I would invite people to check out one of the podcasts that I do that probably has the broadest appeal. It's called My Favorite Mistake. And Tabitha, I'm going to have you as a guest on that show. We can talk about, sometimes mistakes lead to failures. Sometimes, what went wrong just happened, due to other circumstances. But I think it's been really interesting to have really successful people share their mistake stories and how they grew as a result, or how it opened doors. And I think that's reassuring. Look, I mean, people aren't successful because they've never made mistakes. If anything, they make more mistakes, but they learn from them. Yes. And so My Favorite Mistake podcast.com is the website for that. And then I have my most recent book is called The Mistakes That Make Us, which includes a lot of stories from the podcast and from some of my own work and career. People can find that on Amazon or mistakesbook.com. So those would be the main things. And my general website that's got more information about different books and speaking and workshops that I do is markgraban.com.
Awesome. And we'll have all those links. So if you're driving or working out, you can just take a moment, stop, click on the link. You don't have to write it down, nothing like that. So again, thank you so much, Mark. And guys, for you listening, if you are in the what went wrong, if you're struggling, or if you know somebody who is, share this podcast with them. We have a library of amazing people who are sharing their stories, being vulnerable to help you. Remember, be a giver, not a taker. So if you're listening and getting value, share this with everybody you know. And don't forget to rate us and leave a comment, because I read those comments and we take suggestions for our upcoming guests, and we want to know what is serving you. And also, if you're in the what went wrong right now and you're just not sure where to go, maybe it's struggling with some sort of mental health, or maybe business, relationship, anything, just stick with it. All right. Listen to some of these backlog episodes, get the tips to help you lead to the what went right, because if you just persist, it will, I promise. Until next time. Thanks, guys.